again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Jen Moonen.
I'm at AK Stormageddon.
And you're listening to episode 211. And this episode, we're in an unfamiliar place, on a strange planet. We have a lot to do. We have a lot of danger all around us. And my wings are big and powerful no matter what anybody tries to tell me. Because we are talking a bit about the remake of a older Game Boy Advance game, Sigma Star Saga DX from Wayforward. And joining us from Wayforward is Adam Tierney. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you both for having me on.
We're so excited to talk about this game. I was telling you, Adam, a little bit before we started recording that this is a game that Jen has known about for a while and played before, and it's a game that I'd always seen but had no idea what the hell it was. And like looking at the cover, the art is great, but you don't get a sense of what kind of game it is from the cool anime style art on the cover. And so I just never really knew what it was. When you guys reached out, I was like, this is a perfect opportunity for us to talk about the game, explore one of my favorite consoles, the Game Boy Advance, which we've done a retrospective on, and talk about this diamond in the rough that's not always talked about. And so I guess to start, I just want to start by talking about like why remake this game. Because you have a huge library of games, but this one seems to have of import to bring back now. And I'm wondering what the logic behind it was.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very special game for me because this is the first game I was assistant director on. At Matt Bozon, creator of Shantae, was designer director. And I kind of graduated to that role over the course of the game. I started as an animator and then just kept doing more and more responsibilities until halfway through production, he's like, oh, you're assistant director. Like, because at that point I was dabbling in design and dabbling in level design and helping with a little bit of everything. It's one of those titles that nowadays, everything you create from, the last couple generations of consoles, you'll be able to play it in some way or another forever, basically. And whether it's through, PlayStation Plus and Game Pass or Steam, it's just there's much more likelihood that stuff can be played indefinitely more frequently. And this is one of those ones where the company, and especially Matt and I, put so much effort into it at the time, really ambitious story, really ambitious gameplay, the mashup of top-down three-quarter RPG stuff, plus the shmups for the random battles. There was a lot of interesting stuff in here, but there's been no way to play it other than that original, I think it was 2005, 2006 Game Boy Advance cart. And like a lot of early Wayforward stuff, it's also really difficult to find that. And when you can find it, sometimes the aftermarket costs of those really inflate, like, things like that and Aliens Infestation and games of that era, Contra 4, stuff like that. So this seemed like a good one for us to try and get the license to. We had lots of good friends at Bandai Namco. This is one that Matt created, and it has, stylistically, it's in the same kind of wheelhouse as Shantae. I think people, especially the in-game character models, you look at those, you can sense, oh, okay, I could see that from the same creator. So this was always one that a lot of our fans were always asking us about ever since I've been at the company. It was around maybe like 5 years ago or so, like around the beginning of the pandemic, where we started to get more aggressive about bringing back titles. And some of them we decided to do, some of them were with partners like Majesco and Ziggurat, but there was kind of this desire of taking titles that were about 10 years old and porting them forward to the next generations. We did Boy and His Blob, we did Blood Rain Betrayal, we did Double Dragon Neon. That kind of got us an appetite for, hey, we should go after some of this stuff ourselves. This is the one that we had always been asked about, one of the top ones by our fans. And so when we reached out to Bandai Namco about it, they were very open to the idea. So we were very excited to bring this back to modern consoles and also to bring it back to Game Boy Advance as well.
Yeah. It's actually very funny to hear that, you did have to kind of reacquire the rights from the publishers because there is such a strong identity within this that you've already alluded to. From the time you fire it up, any amount of character interaction in this. When Matt and I were talking about the game ages ago, and Matt's like, well, what can you tell me about it? One of the things I said was, it's Wayforward as hell.
Yeah. Very Wayforward core.
Yes. Yeah. And certainly that like mid-2000s, like, of course, the writing's branched out and other things have happened, but it's like, early Shantae. If you like it, if you don't like it, you're correct. And Sigma Star is absolutely in that style. And I think ambition is very much a good word for Sigma Star Saga. I remember reading reviews of it when it first came out and that idea of, it's a top-down RPG that you do shoot-'em-up levels as random battles. And I love both of these genres. And something that comes up a lot in indie games, especially nowadays, people revisiting old ideas and taking their own spin on it. And I think that that is a wonderful thing. We need to have evolution and iteration on these. And we are doing tons of hyphenations and mashups. No one else, I think, is doing this. No one has done this in the last 21 years. You got any thoughts on why that is?
In terms of mashups or shmups and RPGs specifically?
Shmups and RPGs, like this mashup in particular.
I mean, if I had to guess, just based on conversations I've had with publishers, you're probably hearing a lot of developers, if they have the idea, they're probably being shot down as like, well, shmups are niche. Because whenever we pitch a publisher on it, that's what we're told is like, no. Like, if you want to do a cave shooter or something like that, that's like a niche audience. So it's hard to get traction on those for funding. That would be my best guess. Funny enough, it's actually one of the easier genres to pull off shmups just because you just have a character, you're sliding them around on screen, you get some enemies in there. It's the quickest to like playable prototype compared to anything where it's like a platformer or an RPG or anything like that. But
it's why it's an arcade game.
I've found in the last like decade or so, pitching games at Wayforward with external publishers, it's hard to get people on board for shmup games nowadays.
Interesting.
When Jen told me it was a mix of like a top-down kind of Zelda-ish RPG and a shmup, I went, okay. And like couldn't picture it. And then even looking at the graphics and the art and like images, I'm like, And it wasn't until I started playing it, I was like, oh no, that's exactly what it is. Like there's nothing to figure out. It's those two things. And they work really well. What's interesting about DX, because I'm playing it on the Switch, so it's the DX version, is that you added, save states and more save locations and reduced the random battles and a bunch of other like quality of life stuff.
The rewind feature alone.
Yeah, like
Rewind.
Actually having a map to walk around and know where you're going. Yep.
Well, first of all, I love the random battles. They are frequent, but I can't even imagine what they were like on the Game Boy Advance because they still feel kind of frequent to me. Obviously, when you put out a game like that and you have these big ideas, it's rare that you get to revisit and go, okay, well, if we were going to do it again, what would we do different? So I imagine as soon as you started talking about releasing this remastered version, you must have already been planning like all of these different things that you'd want to add to it to kind of like streamline it.
It was interesting because it was kind of a slow progression in that regard. So we knew that if we were going to re-release this, there were a handful of things we wanted to address, myself and Matt. Obviously, the most common one is the frequency of the random battles. There were also like a few legacy bugs because, again, GBA back in 2005, 2006, you didn't get to patch stuff. Like you sent it out to Nintendo and you crossed your fingers and you hope for the best game possible.
Oh, surely you'll get them on the next print run, which of course
exactly.
Sigma Star got.
I don't even know if we've ever had that opportunity.
Exactly.
But we knew of a couple of issues, gameplay and bugs that we wanted to fix. What was interesting though is I think we would have just fixed those naturally and then been done with it and released it to, for manufacturing. But Matt Bozon cracking it back open with the lead programmer, Mike Strage, same lead programmer now as 20 years ago, they started kind of saying, well, what if we fix this? What if we tweak this? And it really kind of kept going to where they basically said at some point, hey, this is kind of a new experience. And that's why Matt wanted to go with the DX title, the deluxe title, because it was a different version of it. It wasn't just addressing like one or two things. The two of them worked on it for several months, really making it the absolute best version of this game that they had started over 20 years ago.
Something that I noticed when I first fired up DX was the menus are full resolution, HD, everything else. And then once you start the game, you're playing original resolution. You are doing that. And while that is to the identity of the game, was there ever a point where you're like, well, should we also HD that, pull that out?
Yeah, we talked about it. And you see Wayforward as a studio has gone in both directions. So, for example, Shantae Advanced Risky Revolution, the console version of that does have HD portraits and certain HD visuals on top of the Game Boy stuff. This one has more of a pure Game Boy experience. This is closer to what we did with titles like Clock Tower Rewind and River City Girls Zero, stuff like that, where once you get into the meat of the game and it's just purely in that original resolution. I think at the end of the day, it's that there's so much different ways of presentation within the game that it wouldn't have quite been as clean as doing that on the Shantae one. So the
Yeah.
Shantae games, when we've done the upres portraits on stuff like Risky Revolution, and then going back to earlier titles like Curse, it's just one system, and we do the one thing upres, and it's very clean. You go through Sigma Star Saga, and there's a lot of versions of that. There's small portraits, there's large portraits, there's big images, there's scrolling images. And so I don't even know if we have all the source art to all of that stuff that would even be considered high res. So I think that, it's something we talked about, but the more we kind of looked at it, and because there's so much scripting in the game. There's like more
Yeah.
scripting in this game than there is even in a modern Wayforward game. I remember we had a dedicated scripting team. It was 3 programmers, and all they did was scripting the sequences, the characters walking around and acting and dialogue sequences and stuff like that. And it just felt like there's so much of that going on. It would be really difficult to put a high res coat of paint on some of that. So this one, we always consider it both ways, but this one seemed like maybe it's better. And the other thing is that this one, because it had been so inaccessible, like nobody had been able to play this outside of getting a used copy for over 20 years. This was like a new version of it versus a lot of the Shantae games. People have played different iterations of it. They're already kind of familiar by the time they buy the PS5 version or the Switch version or stuff like that. There's pros and cons, but for this one, it just feels like a more natural fit to just do the pure experience. But what we did do on this was go back to the functionality and the nuance and the gameplay and additional bug fixing and all that stuff to make it a much more enhanced experience of what Matt and I and everybody were trying to do 20 years ago.
Makes sense. Yeah, Shantae's had that time to it develops the cult following as
Yeah.
future titles came out. It's like, when can we? Versus this just being a standalone piece.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there a lot of that too is we do kind of like the sort of museum aspect of presenting these things.
Me
That's why,
too.
even when they're not our game, when we did Clock Tower Rewind a few years ago, and we were taking the original game that Sunsoft controls now, I forget who the original developer was. We really wanted to present it very carefully, like, hey, this is the first time people are going to be playing this. We want them to experience what they may have heard about or what people have told them about, not monkey with it too much out of the gate.
Speaking to the graphics, I mean, some of my favorite pixel art games are Wayforward pixel art games. I think
Oh, thank
about,
you.
I mean, we recently did a episode of our sub series on Pirate's Curse, and Pirate Curse is my favorite just because I like chunky pixel art. I love a Metroidvania. This game also, from the minute I booted it up, all of the sprites are readable. You can really see the detail. It reminds me of the early Shantae stuff, as we talked about earlier. But I think also there's something about playing it for me on the Switch 2 on the blown up portable screen. It's like playing other Game Boy Advance games on NSO. Like, the Game Boy Advance is one of the most gorgeous consoles ever designed for, because when you blow it up, it doesn't get worse. As much as I love the Game Boy, as much as I love the Game Boy Color, when you blow it up, you can see the pixelation. It still looks okay, but like, you can see it start to unravel a little. Whereas this, they just look better, even bigger, and you can totally tell that from the minute this game boots up. I'm a fan of that art style. It's why the Game Boy Advance remains one of my favorite consoles, is because the majority of the games, some did try to do like the weird 3D pixel art, but for the most part, it was this. It was like pixel design, anime or cartoon style, and like, it just really pops. And I think Sigma Star is definitely emblematic of that era for sure.
Yeah, and I think especially like the talent that we had on this. So we've got the typical way forward sprites. A lot of the backgrounds were done in interesting ways. Jeremy Dower, I remember, did a lot of the backgrounds, and his style was very brushy. When you're walking around in the overworld and also the shmup areas, it has more of a brushed style to it. And I think that helps the characters pop even more than like a manually placed pixel for the background stuff.
Makes
Yes,
sense.
totally. I want to talk a little bit about the music. Now, the package's title screen, the jaunty pop sci-fi track with lyrics, like, getting hit by a song with lyrics in a Way Forward game is my favorite thing. Happens in Yars Rising a lot too. Some of my favorite tracks on that one, the recent Shantae games. It feels like there's something about like these kind of pop influenced songs that really fit the vibe. Is that just a general love of that kind of pop music in the office, or does it come from somewhere else?
We love whenever we can do vocal tracks just because it is very engaging. And for me, it always kind of immediately gives that feel of like a more valued products. And it doesn't have to be necessarily console. Like even go back to, I remember playing one of the WarioWare titles had like full vocal track on one of the islands, and it just blew my mind. And so ever since then, just as a developer, I've loved whenever we can put vocal tracks and stuff. And so yeah, that's something that we found is very useful in terms of marketing, in terms of getting people excited, and also just anybody who picks up the title, just playing it and just having that really great first impression when you get to the first title screen. And so yeah, this was a great one where we reteamed with Mega McDuffie, who did all of the compositions for the last couple River City Girls games, and she did a duet with Demon Dice, who we up with previously on a song for River City Girls Zero, and the two of them did this duet that was based on one of the melodies from the original game, and it was just so nice to have that in there. Like I said, we didn't add too much to the game, but we wanted to add a couple of things, that plus the art gallery, plus the jukebox and stuff outside of the game, so that when you play it on consoles, you get those little extra features and stuff. But that was one that I was really excited that we could pull together.
Now, I do have to ask, because we are diving into this game and really getting to the core of it. When did you start doubling as a commander of Earth's army? And how did you fight the Krill? It was very fun to boot up this game not knowing anything about it. And the minute I meet the commander, I went, oh, Commander Tierney, that's fun. So, like, how did that come to be? Was it just like a fun homage to you working on the game? Like, I'm always curious when characters are named for existing people.
So Matt did that, and I don't know 100% why. It just sort of just appeared in the script. I believe, I might have asked him at one point. I think it's just because my name sounds like tyranny, and so it just sounds evil.
Sure. Yeah,
but
sure.
yeah, it was just, I was working on the game, and then suddenly, as he finalized the script, there it was. I was the villain. Now, the fun part, though, is that my first ever video game writing experience, because now I've written, dozens of games
Sure.
at Wayforward and otherwise, was the very end of the game. He has some little lengthy villain speech for several pages of dialogue, and I remember Matt either let me write that or let me rewrite it, I forget. And so that was the first time I ever actually wrote in a game, was I wrote the villainous Tierney's evil dialogue at the end of the game.
Amazing. I love that. I love little tidbits like that. It adds, there's a personalization to a game. And like for someone like me who's been following the company and your games for so long, it's fun to still get little surprises like this and play a game that I've not played before. I want to talk about the desire to adjust the mechanical stuff a bit. We touched on it a little bit by like adding physical save points in the game is interesting to me. I feel like adding a save state, that's pretty common now. Classic games do that often, a rewind as well, which is more in the interface of the game than the game itself. But adding extra save points and reducing the random battles, you had to get into the code to do that. And so was that challenging to go back to something that you originally had and like tweak it in that way?
So that was one of the nice things about this, is most of the time when we've done ports of our games, especially when we're working with externally developed stuff like Clock Tower or River City Girl Zero, we don't have access to any of the code. And so we're basically just taking the finished ROMs and kind of poking around in there and seeing what we can adjust and how far we can change things. With this one, because we had the original source code, this was done at Wayforward just a couple of decades ago, and we had the original lead programmer Mike Strage back on the title, we could change anything we wanted. And so that was kind of a nice thing, and that added that flexibility, that nuancing where the save spots would be and the frequency of that and the frequency of random battles and all of that stuff is a luxury that we would not have had, definitely, if we were just doing like a typical ROM hack on this. I think there's not many titles remaining at this point that are like Wayforward developed ones that are completely unavailable that we'd like to go back to. There's a few that we're targeting: Wonder Momo, Typhoon Booster, Till Morning's Light. There's a few where it's like, oh, those are like really cool Wayforward games. You can't play them anymore. They're kind of orphan titles. So if we ever get to go back to any of those as well, then we have that same flexibility to kind of open the hood and tinker with whatever we want. But that was one of the nice things about this. Yes. And I think that Matt and Mike worked on this for a few months, really just nuancing everything to get the best version of the game. And even as speaking as somebody who worked on it back then, playing it through again now, it definitely did feel like a more just balanced, smooth experience than the previous version.
Yeah, and I think it's important that these kinds of experiences be preserved, not just for the sake of fans of the old game that want it to come back. I mean, it's very funny that several Game Boy Advance titles that are like valued pieces of my collection, not just Sigma Star Saga. I mean, Ninja 5.0 is now out thanks to Limited Run.
That's a great one.
Yeah, exactly. This is a conversation that Storm and I have a lot. So many game experiences should be preserved, not just the famous ones, not just the best sellers, the highs and lows, the high sellers, the low sellers, because this is how people find new favorites. This is how people see the DNA of things. You know, the idea of people who are Wayforward fans now of the last 5-6 years can now play this and go, oh, this is where, they can see the DNA of so
Yeah.
many things that they love as well.
And especially, I think if anybody is a fan of Matt Bozon, especially, he really has not done that many games not related to Shantae in quite some time. I think the last game that he directed, top to bottom, that wasn't Shantae related was Contra 4, which is I think almost 20 years old, or about 20 years old right now.
Just
So
about,
these.
yeah.
Yeah, these kind of like pure Bozon-esque experiences that are outside the Shantae universe are few and far between. And so I think the more that we can bring those back for the Shantae fans, especially, to have something ancillary that they can also check out, and in a different genre, both in terms of gameplay and in terms of storytelling and stuff, is a real treat whenever we can pull that off.
Yeah, I mean, it's so fun to see a creator that I know well do other things. We talked about this a bit with James when we interviewed him about Yars Rising. You know, Matt's fingerprints are all over that too, especially the dialogue and the kind of way the characters act. There's an attitude to his protagonists and his characters that I just kind of feel universal. And it's funny too, you talked about dialogue. There's a fair amount of dialogue in Yars, and there's a fair amount of dialogue in the Shantae games, but there is definitely. I'm only got about halfway through the game. I intend to finish it, but I got to the ice planet, and like there's just so much storytelling.
Yep.
It's such a short amount of time. And like Shantae has world building too, but it's usually quips and like one-liners and goofs and fun. This really has deep sci-fi lore. I feel like that isn't uncommon for Wayforward as a studio, but it definitely seems like it's not typically what you guys do. You've done it before, but this feels like refreshing because it's just so different from what I've experienced with other games that you guys have made.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. And I mean, especially, I think part of it being such a genre shift, because the Shantae games are just very cheerful adventure games and have like a typical fun anime feel. I know Matt's very influenced by stuff like Ranma One Half and things like that. This is a little bit darker, and it's much more sci-fi, and it's much more about espionage and backstabbing and multiple factions and stuff like that. So it's definitely a different type of story that Matt was able to tell, and I'm so glad that people get to experience it now. Especially people might be buying it now that weren't even alive when it came out, which makes me feel very old. But
Yes.
but
Yeah.
it's good too.
Yeah.
My goodness.
There's a level of cheese that I love in most video games, right? Like I love when games are serious, but when they don't take themselves too seriously. Also, the early moments in this game where you're playing as the lead character, Wrecker, it feels very Top Gun cheesy, like, and then as it goes, like as you get to know the other characters, he wins over their trust. It's like, oh no, there's layers here, and I love that. It's very easy for video games to be one note, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, a gameplay experience is just as valuable, and any game can be someone's favorite game. But I think what I like about this game particularly is that it both takes itself seriously and doesn't take itself that seriously in the same breath. And I think that's a big staple of the studio more than anything else, is that you are just as likely to make someone feel emotional as you are to make them laugh. And it's a nice mix.
That's the goal always, is start with the fun aspects, and then by the end you're just really heartfelt about these characters. Matt's always been great at that, and I think you definitely do get that silliness as you walk around in the space stations, and you'll have NPCs just make off funny little one-liners, sometimes kind of meta about like, I don't know much to do in this game. That sort of stuff is always very fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We start off very much, Wrecker having just, commanded Sigma Squadron and have lost all of his men, and this is terrible. And then complete fish out of water. And then we can have all of the fun of world building. And we really can stretch that for wherever we need to, however we need to. Things that are scary that are actually harmless. Harmless things that are hilarious. Hilarious things that are scary. The surprise is part of the fun, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely, for sure.
With Sigma Star coming back, and with Risky Revolution bringing back something that thought long dead, that never got finished, that now got to come out, it seems like that you guys are very much focused on preservation as much as you are new stuff. But of course, we do know that you guys are officially working on the next Shantae title in some way, and it's coming, which I'm very excited about. It seems like that it's important to the studio to balance both your history, your past, and your future. It seems like that's a big part of the ethos of the studio.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also part of it is just we're a very small studio, relative to a lot of indie developers out there. A lot of it comes from just us being very limited in terms of our bandwidth for putting new content out. So getting stuff that we can bring back to modern consoles, or we can give it a new coat of fresh paint, or we can do like a director's cut of it. These are smaller efforts than to do a game from scratch. And so part of it is absolutely that kind of museum-ish aspect, especially for the Wayforward super fans that want to play everything they see listed on our Wikipedia page, but they didn't have an NVIDIA Shield, so they couldn't play Wonder Momo and stuff like that. So that's why I want to get back to all those things. But also part of it is these are efforts we can get in the cracks in between the big new productions and increase the amount of things that we're putting out as a studio. That's why we also dabbled a few years ago with teaming with external developers as well. We did on Dawn of the Monsters with 13 AM and Lunark with Canary Games, where we would take titles that looked interesting to us. That metric was always like, does this feel like something that Wayforward could have made ourselves? Because we don't want to publish anything that feels like a total 180 turn stylistically from what we're known for. And then we would help them guide that. So we would still be involved with those things in terms of feedback, in terms of assisting with, say, like cinematics or VO or dialogue or stuff like that to make it, as charming as possible. But it all really comes down to it takes a long time to make games. And even more so now. When I first started at the company a little over 20 years ago, we would be on a production for maybe 6 months, maybe 8 months if we're lucky. Now games are somewhere between 18 to 24 months, sometimes even longer than 24 months. So we're stretching out the frequency of releasing Wayforward games much more wide than it was previously. And I think it's even more important then to try and have little stopgap releases as much as possible so that the fans that want to play our stuff have something to do and they're not just waiting a really long time in between our major releases.
Jen and I talk about this all the time. It's a miracle that two games in a series come out on the same console. The fact that we got Half
Oh,
Genie
yeah.
Hero and Seven Sirens both on the Switch, like both on that gen, basically, is astonishing because that just doesn't happen anymore. And so I'm always excited when you can get multiple iterations of a series. Like the fact that I have the entire Shantae Pantheon on my Switch, except for Pirate's Curse, which I bought the re-release recently so I could have it on my 3DS and play it on my 3DS. But like basically having an entire franchise on one console is also unheard of. So it does seem important also when you can make those collections or you can bring all those things to
Yes.
one place to make sure they're available so anyone can get them without having to buy the latest and greatest thing almost.
And that's the big thing for us, whether it's targeting like a PS5 release of everything, or even just getting it on additional platforms like itch.io or GOG or anything like that. The more that we can have full libraries, the bigger and wider we can do our libraries. That's what we want. We want to basically find our fans where they are and then try and give them the biggest breadth of Wayforward library possible every time.
Given Wayforward's long history, I mean, you've been with the company for 20 years, and then the company started in 1990, and I'm sure has gone through many iterations since, and has dabbled in publishing as well. So Wayforward as a company has had a very interesting web of, in some cases, needing to get the rights from some publishers and being the publishers themselves. Are there any like major differences that you feel in that process, or how that has affected the identity of the company, or how you feel about all of the games that come through with a Wayforward label, no matter where on the docket it is?
One of the big shifts that I've noticed over the past decade, especially in the games industry, and this is like as the biz dev guy at WayForward, is everything has shifted from a work for hire focus to a license out focus. And it's not always the same. It actually kind of ebbs and flows. But generally speaking, and especially post pandemic, more of the bigger companies want to license their brands out as opposed to want to hire developers to make their games. On the one hand, that makes it more challenging because we have to kind of figure out how we're going to put productions together, how we're going to get our games funded. But on the other hand, it means that basically any IP we like, we can probably get the rights to and make a game based off of. And so some of the stuff we're doing right now, some of our favorite brands of all time are the games that we're, starting to work on right now, or we're already midway working through. And so I think if anything, that's kind of a shift that you might see from Wayforward is, in addition to, we're always going to do original stuff like Shantae, we're always going to do kind of the reimagined takes on things like River City Girls to Kudio-kun, but I think you're probably going to see more games coming out from us in the next 2 or 3 years where they're taking a very classic beloved brand that we're super fans of and then putting our spin on that, the same way that in the past we've been able to do that on things like Batman and Contra and Adventure Time and stuff like that. So as a studio, that's something that I think takes up a lot more of our focus now, and it's just because, like, hey, everything's out there, all you need to do is just find the email for the right person and you could be working on basically a game adaptation of anything.
So if you really did want to make a sequel to Justice League Heroes The Flash, you
Yeah.
probably could.
We actually almost did way back when. Yeah, there was a thing that almost happened where there would have been a pretty direct sequel to that. And unfortunately, it just didn't see the light of day. But I've got some pretty cool concept materials around that one.
That was the best depiction of super speed in any
Oh,
kind
thank
of
you.
video game I think I'd seen, certainly in a beat 'em up title. I remember
Yeah.
reading a review of it way back when and going, really? And then finally finding it years later, and it was worth the wait.
Oh,
So
thank you.
love that.
Yeah, it was. I directed that one, and I remember going over it with Armando Soto, one of our other directors at the time, and the two of us were brainstorming what the game would be, and we were like, "How can we convey this?" And I remember that the light bulb for us was we thought Flash should move between enemies the way that you pass a soccer ball in soccer games.
Yeah.
And so once we had that, it's like, oh, you are the soccer ball. You press a button, Flash will instantly seek over to a guy and then back and then back. And it just made sense. And it was just immediately fun. So yeah, that was a fun one.
It solves a sprite issue that often happens in beat 'em up games, and by slowing everybody else down just a little bit, you don't have
Yeah.
to lose control, but you still feel so fast.
Yeah.
Obvious in hindsight. Anyway.
It's clear that you guys have a deep love of kind of manipulating the classics into something that's original or just enhancing them. Contra Operation Galuga is a thing that I completely missed. I didn't see the announcement. I didn't see the release. And then I was at the limited run when they did the pop-up shop, and I'm wandering through, and you guys were selling a ton of physical stuff, from a variety of limited run stuff, not just you guys. And I saw that, I went, wait, Wayforward worked on a Contra game? And I immediately bought it, and it would take me a while to get around to playing, but once I did, I was like, oh, these guys love Contra, which we knew already.
yeah.
To play a game that is so deeply like, what if Contra existed now? What would that look like? Since obviously there have been many failed attempts to bring that franchise back, the way you guys just devoted yourselves to what both classic Contra was, but also how do we modernize it, new characters, a deeper story. I thought it was done really well, and I think it just shows that beyond just loving what you make and the franchises that are in-house, you also have a deep love of the classics and want to see them shine as well.
Yeah, I think that one especially, I think Wayforward does certain things well, and one of them is doing an update but keeping solid traditional gameplay fundamentals. I don't think you go to Wayforward if you want something that is just like wildly experimental and doesn't have like 1 foot in Super Nintendo or Genesis. That's kind of our bread and butter. And it's kind of funny, both of the Contra titles we worked on, the first one was Contra 4 on Nintendo DS, and then this most recent one was Contra Operation Galuga on modern consoles. They were kind of a similar situation where if you look at the Contra titles that happened just before those, they started to get really experimental and really veer off course from what the very first few games were. Same thing happened with the DS one. That was when they were doing like the PS2 games, I think, like the Ashley
Yeah.
Wood art ones and all
Mhm.
that stuff. It's very weird compared to Contra. And I think back then Konami was like, hey, we need a traditional style of Contra. And so we got the gig, and I think what Matt did, he directed that one, just really came out great. And then they were in a similar situation with this most recent one where the prior Contra game was was it kind of like an overhead shooter with a panda bear? And it was just
Mhm.
so
Right.
different. And so I think it was just another situation where they're like, hey, we want to do a very traditional Contra. And we were already talking with them at that time, and they gave us the opportunity. I think it came out great. Yeah, I was a big fan of that recent title.
I remember when Contra 4 came out, and honestly, that kind of was the party lines like, we love Contra. We love Contra. This is a little weird. And so there is something to be said for, keep the fundamentals. Sometimes that's exactly
Yeah.
what we're here for.
Yeah, and you can have both, but I think there's something to be said for it's, like a lot of what Wayforward does, like when you look at when we do DuckTales Remastered and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that, I think you could call it like comfort food. We're like good developers of video game comfort food. And so I think a lot of our bread and butter that comes to us from studios, especially when we get opportunities where publishers are reaching out to us and saying, hey, here's what we're interested in. A lot of it is like, because you guys just did this or because you guys are good at this. And it's all kind of that classic gameplay fundamentals.
Yeah, DuckTales Remastered is one of those, like, as a kid who grew up watching the cartoon, the fact that you guys got the original voice actors to do the vocals for it are great. But now in my heart of hearts, I loved the remake, the new series with David Tennant.
Yep.
In my heart of hearts, I would love like a new version that has both casts and both like styles. Like, obviously a dream project, but like what I love is that it's not a far field because you guys really do have this love letter to the classics and really know how to reach the fans and what they want. Like, I would have never imagined in a million years that my favorite NES game would get a reimagining and that the voice cast of one of my favorite cartoons would do it, right? Like, it's just one of those things that feels kind of magical and is something that kind of video games can only do.
And especially that one, we got all the original cast that was still available to do it, but we had like Alan Young as Scrooge and June Foray as Magic and the Spell. I think both of them were in their 80s when they recorded our game.
Yes.
And so that was a real nice, like, as somebody who grew up on those cartoons, that was such a nice swan song to like get that cast together, to hear those actors still just really killing it. I mean, Alan just sounded exactly like Scrooge, did not miss a beat, nailed all the jokes. Same thing with June. And they both passed, I believe, just a few years after that game.
Yeah.
I think those are some of the most amazing moments we've, been able to be a part of as a studio.
It's an amazing thing to capture. Yeah. Alan Young passed away in 2016 and June Foray in 2017.
Yeah.
Capturing these moments, preserving these experiences cannot be overstated.
Yeah. Yeah.
Obviously, we're a ways away from the next Shantae and whatever you're working on next, but it does sound like that you guys have some stuff planned and you're working towards some things. It sounds like still a little bit of the bring back the past as well as the new. It seems like that's the two pillars that drive you guys at this point. And it's also exciting, though, that you guys are in the publishing game. I think being partnered with Limited Run, the use of the Carbon engine, which I feel like a lot of this stuff wouldn't be possible as easily, at least. I imagine having that power behind it as well, and those great partnerships are also help fuel the development of these games. I mean, again, to get Shantae Advance, to get Shantae Risky Revolution in 2025, came out last year. It's hard to remember what year it is. For it to both be on cart and digital is incredible. And the fact that I, as someone who pre-ordered the cartridge, got it early, was able to review it and talk about it early because it just wasn't out for consoles yet. The cartridges came first. It just feels special. It seems like there is a deep love for these partnerships that allow you to keep doing these things that you do.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, across the board, working with Limited Run on physicals, we're not exclusive. If anybody was curious, like we still do other work with other great publishers, like Nighthawk Interactive did our horror games, Halloween and Evil Dead. Like we still work with a lot of great places, but LRG is just really great about teaming up with. We love doing all the extras and all the special features. As you mentioned, working with Carbon Team is been fantastic on the titles that we've done as a partnership on there. Yeah, I mean, within Wayforward, I think the games that we do that come out the best are just when you have really nice partnerships and teams that just are excited to work with each other. And that really just kind of radiates to working externally as well, whether we're doing straight publishing partners or whether we're working with IP partners, like when we worked with Rooster Teeth on the Ruby game or Arc System Works on all the various River City Girls games. I think we just get excited to factor in external partnerships and external ideas and IPs and stuff like that. That definitely gets us excited, especially again when we're in a world now where we can basically chase after any type of company, any of the partners that, like the companies we're talking to now that we're working with. It's ridiculous. It's like, oh, that publisher is behind so many of the NES titles that I grew up loving, and we're getting to work with all the people that have inspired us and made us want to get into video games in the first place. So it's definitely a very exciting new world as far as that stuff goes.
I know that a lot of these things are deals that happen and things that you can or cannot talk about, but also older licenses can often be caught in such a limbo that it is, private detectives to track down who's got the rights kind of thing. Are there any properties, games, like they don't have to be good or whatever, but they're ones that you're like, more people should see this, whether they're easy to find or not? Like what are those shoot the moon perfect world Wayforward can now bring that to the public?
just back up for a second, the rights sometimes are very embroiled in a bunch of different stuff. And,
Yes, they
and
are.
sometimes it gets worked out. So, for example, when we worked on Clock Tower with Sunsoft, you'll see Capcom's logo at the bottom because Capcom was involved in that. So we had to get all the parties aligned. Same thing with Aliens Infestation. We really want to figure out getting the rights to that one. But we did that for Sega and Gearbox, and Aliens was 20th Century Fox and now owned by Disney. So it's all these different things that, all the stars have to align as far as getting that stuff together.
I mean, you worked on a game with Atari, and people hear Atari and they assume it's been the same company the entire time,
Oh,
and
no,
it
yeah.
sure hasn't.
No, it changes hands pretty regularly, yeah. But there's definitely been, like, I forget which one off the top of my mind, but I remember there was one game that we were seeking out at one point because we were looking for a lot of like old NES and SNES titles that we could potentially bring to modern consoles. And the company, the Japanese company, again, I just don't remember which company it was or the title, I found they stopped making video games in like the 90s. And I said, oh, that's okay. And I emailed them. I'm like, hey, can we get the rights to this Famicom game so we can port it? And they said, oh, no, we don't make games anymore. And I said, oh, that doesn't really matter. You could just give us the rights and then we'll give you some money and then we can make the game. And they were just like, no, why are you talking to us? We don't make games anymore. And so it was just a sad thing of like, wow, they just do not want to have a conversation. And that game, whatever it was, I'd have to look at my own emails, will just never get a resurrection again at this point. That does happen occasionally, or sometimes there's confusion about who owns the rights to stuff. More often than not, it's changed hands, but you can kind of just figure out who it's with currently. But it takes a little bit of effort sometimes for sure.
I would imagine it's a bit of the give a mouse a cookie. It's, it's this person. Now you got to talk to this person, to this
Yeah.
person. I would love to know who has had to go on the longest trail to find who owns the rights to games, whether it's with y'all or some other company that's just been like, I just really want to bring this out there. Who owns it?
Well, I can tell you there's one that we're in discussions with where the beginning of our discussions about this IP started over 5 years ago, and it's still
Wow.
going on.
Oh my gosh.
But those are the ones that are sometimes worth it. If 5 years of emails and meetings turns into a game becoming reality, then I'm happy.
I'm here for that.
Do you think there's a world in which you and Matt would return to the world of Sigma Star Saga? Is this something that feels like it's just a one and done and you're glad to have it back? Or is there a world in which maybe there would be a modern version or another, make it into something new?
I mean, I remember we were very heavy in sequel discussions after the first one came out.
Yeah.
We had like, potential plans for what a second game would be and which characters it would follow and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, especially with a game like that where it's so focused on the lore and the characters, it's still possible. But I think at this point, it would depend on the success of this one. But this one ended up just
Right.
being a really big hit and really got a lot of people interested in it. Then I think that might have us take a look at it and say, oh, could we do something else in here? Or maybe we can do something with those characters. Because,
Right.
now that we've got a licensing deal with Bandai Namco, the easier route is if we had somebody like Syme or Scarlet appear in another Wayforward game. That would
Sure.
probably be the more likely thing, I think.
Okay.
But
That'd be cool.
nothing's impossible. I think was probably more likely to get a sequel 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Just because Matt and everybody else have so many things that they now have got queued up that they want to work on that probably have a higher priority. But like we always say, if you like Wayforward stuff, vote with your wallets. There's a reason why games like Shantae and River City Girls get sequels and get DLC content. And that's largely because people buy those products larger in more quantity than other titles of ours. And that will always draw our attention.
And more immediately, I would imagine, too. Like, it's
Yeah.
great that Wayforward has had a long enough history that games can have a slow burn, but the window gets smaller and smaller every year of it being declared a success and a failure. If you haven't sold X million within the first 14 minutes, we are
Oh, yeah.
closing down your studio and taking your house.
Well, I think one of the nice things, though, is Wayforward and working for a CEO founder like Voldy Way, who's all of our bosses, working with a creative director like Matt Bozon. So much of what we do really doesn't have a deeper conversation other than, oh man, it'd be cool if. Like,
I
I think
love that.
I've worked with a lot of places and I've coordinated with a lot of other publishers, and there's so much like sales projections and estimates on what the marketplace is and what the audience is. Really, we've just always led with our guts on what we like, and especially the way that we make games, because it's so director driven. Whoever is directing a way forward game is probably also designing it, it's probably also writing it. They might even be art directing it or level designing it. But we usually have, the directors on way forward games are more akin to like a movie director than I think a lot of more kind of assembly line studios in America especially are. We've been told it's kind of a little bit more of like a Japanese style of kind of game direction. I think with that, the more that we can just get somebody excited about something, the better product we're going to have. As I'm lining up new deals, as I'm looking for licenses and opportunities and stuff, really that's just what we chase more than anything. Is I'll talk to all of our directors and say, what are you guys excited about? Like, tell me whatever you want me to chase, no matter how obscure, whatever, as long as it's something cool, as long as it's a good fit for way forward, as long as we can scrounge the funding together for it, I know it'll be better if they're excited about working on it.
Yeah.
So if we want to be able to come up with the term shmup PG or schmar PG or whatever it is, more people got to be into it. More people got to check that out.
Yeah.
I think that mix-up in particular is a really good one. And
Yeah.
obviously I'm biased saying that, but just even beyond way forward, I would like to see more people do that, because
Absolutely.
I think shmups especially, I think they are satisfying in small bite sizes. I liked especially, I don't remember how many there were, but I think there was over a dozen mini bosses in this game, and you could be surprised by a mini boss versus a random stage. I love stuff like that. And so I think the shmup as a random battle is something that I would love to see more places do, even outside of way forward.
And coming at it now with modern sensibilities and modern builds, it can play a lot differently, and you can do some interesting integrations as well. It's very funny. This is episode 211 for us. Episode 210 was interviewing with one of the developers of Mini Shoot Adventures, which was
Nice.
the Zelda-like top-down twin-stick
Yeah.
shooter. So not exactly the same thing, but it's also, they could have fun with the mechanics, but it didn't have the same sense of character because of how they had to do it. All this to say, yeah, there should be more exploration of this. And if nothing else, you're absolutely right, Adam. Taking the concepts of a shmup and taking the adrenaline pumping and everything else and not making it the entire game, but making it these moments, it shouldn't be ignored. It's absolutely worth examining and continuing.
Yeah, I hope we get to do more of it. We've done very few shmups. Obviously, this one we did Cat Girl Without Salad, but even that is a micro game. It's only 3 stages, 3 bosses. I'd love to see us just do more shmups in general, but haven't had too much opportunity, but I'm always looking out for it.
What I really love about this conversation and this idea that you just kind of follow your hearts and it doesn't matter how obscure is like, it's no secret that the original Shantae was not this huge gangbuster success. And if a larger studio just gone, well, it wasn't good, all right, move on, we wouldn't have this incredible series, right? It didn't find its legs till much later. And I feel like it's such a crime that a lot of studios these days don't get to fail. You have to fail to figure out. Nobody's perfect out of the gate. And also like the freedom to do what you want to follow your heart. I mean, it's been said to death, but Clair Obscur Expedition 33 wouldn't exist if a smaller studio just did a thing they thought was cool. And I want more games. It's that old meme, like I want shorter games made for less money with smaller, all of that. I want that because I think often that lets people feel more free to do whatever they want. And I think another reason why Jen and I are so attracted to Way Forward and your legacy and your games is because you can feel that in the way these games are made. When there's a bizarre mini game and a Shantae game, and you're like, why is this here? I guess they just felt like that kind of freedom is fun and goofy. And, I think that a game like Sigma Star Saga couldn't exist if you had someone standing behind you going, well, why would you mix those two things?
Right.
Like, the fact that you guys sat there and went, this is weird, let's try it, and it works, and it works well, is, it doesn't always have to, but it's fun when it does, and you only find those things by being that free and making those kinds of experiments.
You said it right at the very beginning that, why don't more people do shoot 'em ups? Well, publishers don't say that's niche.
Yeah, and I think what the tendency is at a lot of studios is to shave off the rough edges. I think that's, you look at it, it's like, well, why is this here? Why is this? All the little things that don't make sense or that are unconventional, 9 times of 10, those are the things that people remember about our games. Like when people think of A Boy and His Blob, they think of the hug button. The hug button doesn't do anything. There's no functionality to it, but everybody loves it. Yeah, it hugs. Same thing with like River City Girls when you're doing 2-player. to save your friend, you punch your friend until their sucks their soul back into him. We just like it's the weird stuff like that, and it's the experimental stuff that always has the most charm and always has the most memorability for gamers. And I think that we work at a studio where just from the top on down, there's not a mechanism in place to kill those things or to weed those out. And I think that's something that's very unique to Wayforward, especially as a studio.
I think so, and especially what you were talking about before, how some people have noted it sounds more like how a Japanese studio runs. These things allow for Way Forward to have a personality. We were talking about before, oh, this feels like a Way Forward game. How many studios would kill to have identifiable pieces, aspects, styles to them? And
Yeah.
it's personality that shows through.
Yeah, and especially humor. I mean, that's something that
Yeah.
I think if you look at the way forward stuff at the beginning and even when I started versus like the last decade, we're getting better or at least more robust, I think, in terms of our storytelling capabilities, like how we can do cinematics, how we can do VO, how we can do dialogue, how we can do cutscenes and motion comics. Like it's almost kind of like a lot of our games are really starting to dip more and more of a toe into half game studio and half anime or comic or motion picture studio, and I think that's something that we've always loved doing. So it's nice to see us kind of be able to experiment on that stuff. And I think that's where you get the best bang for your buck too. Like if you have a good director or a good writer on one of our games and they've got a good sense of humor or they've got a really funny character, it doesn't take a lot of effort. It doesn't cost a lot of money to have a very funny character record some funny dialogue. We're looking to maximize the personality in our games in the budgets and the timelines that we have. And I think we get better at that every year.
It's the personalities that draw me to the games. I mean, all the games we've mentioned in this episode that you guys made, especially recent stuff like Shantae and Yars, like Shantae is all personality, right? It's all character.
Yep.
It's like an ensemble cast. And I think that's also what made Yars stick for me too, is that ensemble cast. Like the lead is very good, but she also plays very well off the villains and the
Yep.
heroes. And like, I think not everyone builds games, especially humor wise, with an ensemble cast in mind. I think the most successful ones more recently, like the stuff you guys do, Dispatch, all of that, like is because they're leaning on ensembles and not just one hero and one
Yes.
specific kind of white hero specifically. It's very much a diverse group with, I mean, you guys have a hero zombie, which is, I love Roddy Tops, right? One of my favorites. Like thinking like that and just like, what if we get weird with it? It seems to be the ethos in a way that makes your stories more approachable for me because you lean into the weird, you lean into the goofy stuff.
Thankfully, when we do have the opportunity to do sequels and DLC, like we've done at this point, we're working on the seventh Shantae game. We've done 3.5 games of River City Girls. You really just get to know the characters, and I think that's
Yeah.
a huge advantage. Is whenever we can get a sequel or whenever we can bring characters back, at that point we know who they are, we know how they act, we know how they interact with other characters, we know how they behave with their friends and family, and it's such a nice opportunity whenever we can do that because it's such a heavy lift to figure out that personality and that tone and that humor and those characters from scratch with each game. And we're happy to do it, but definitely even more exciting, I think, when we can revisit some of that stuff. So that's another thing that, like the ones you mentioned, like, Yars Rising, we would love to do another Yars Rising game now that we know Emmy and all those characters inside out.
Adam, thank you for taking the time to chat with us. This was wonderful. Of course, you can currently find Sigma Star Saga DX on the Game Boy Advance if you're very lucky, or on PC, PS5, and Switch. I highly recommend it. I think if you at any point during this interview went, shoot 'em up RPG, what the fuck does that mean? Go play it. Like, seriously, just go buy it and play it.
If you love it, don't care. If it intrigues you, try it.
Yeah.
This is how these things propagate and continue. We have to be curious. Please be curious about this game. It's very infuriating.
Adam, do you want to tell folks where they can find you, best place to find you and Wayforward online?
Yeah, just go to wayforward.com. We update our website whenever we have new game releases. Follow us on Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, everywhere else, TikTok. We'll always post whenever we have sales going on for our games. frequent sales. We often are included in bundles with places like Humble. And so if you're a Wayforward fan, follow us and we'll let you know when things are coming out. And also trying to do more live events. We are doing SCV Collectibles is a collectible show in Santa Clarita Valley. If you happen to get up there, Wayforward has a permanent booth. And so sometimes we'll do live events there. We'll do signings with artists and stuff. Beyond that, we're trying to get to as many conventions as possible. We've done Anime Expo the past 3 years. We've done Los Angeles Comic-Con on and off. So keep an eye on our social media and we'll do announcements whenever we're at these special events, whenever we'll do live signings, whenever we have extra copies of our games for sale. Otherwise, thanks for supporting our games.
And thank you for letting us gush at you about how much we enjoy these
Thank
games.
you for gushing.
And now, listener, we put it to you. Have you played Sigma Star Saga DX yet? If not, why not? Did you play the original? What did you think of it then, and what do you think of it now? What do you think of this idea of this kind of a genre mashup, and what other Wayforward games have you enjoyed, and which ones do you wish you could more easily play on modern consoles? These conversations go on here, they continue online, they go everywhere, and you never know when what you express can become a dream come true. So get out there, reach out, and let us know too. There's so many great ways to get in touch with us. We are Fun and Games Pod across all social media that we are currently active upon, which as of this episode is Instagram, Blue Sky, and Tumblr. You can email us at funandgamespod@gmail.com. Let us know what you thought of this episode, what you thought of previous episodes, what you'd like us to talk about, and who you'd like us to talk with on future episodes. You can visit certainpov.com and find not only other fantastic Certain POV podcasts, but also a permanent invite link to our Discord server, where a lot of these conversations continue. You can go to our Games Beaten channel and see just how many Wayforward games Matt, I, and other folks on the server have beaten. There's enough out there, and we do really like them. If you like what Matt and I do and have the means or desire to support us so we can continue doing this, going to more conventions, and continuing to expand our scope, we do have a Patreon. Patreon.com/funandgamespod. There is a free tier, so if you just want access to the RSS feed and a one-stop shop of all the things Matt and I are working on, you don't have to pledge any money, but we do appreciate everybody on the Patreon, and we especially want to shout out the high scoreboard. Today, the high scoreboard is Alex Lavelle, Case Aiken, Daniel Nyden, Sean Bowen, Film It Yourself, Dave Jackson, Tales from the Backlog, Alejandro Alves, Curly Bright, and Chris Copleen. Thank you so much for your support. Please enter your initials. You will have to shoot the letters down as they come at you. You might need to switch up the gun data to make sure that you get the vowels versus the consonants, but don't worry, they'll come back around again. Don't worry about it. It's a random encounter. We can try again.
And of course, if you want another free way to support us, the best way to do that is, of course, rating and reviewing this podcast on your platform of choice. You can do it on a variety of platforms, from Pocket Casts to Spotify to Apple Podcasts. Basically, anywhere there's a podcast, there's a way to rate or review it. And it really helps us grow this community and more folks to find the podcast and hang out with us.
Whether you are truly the greatest fan of Sigma Star Saga, whether you are here for the 7th Shantae whenever it comes out, pull up a chair, we'll happily wait with you, or whether this is your first episode of Fun and Games. Thank you so much for being here. We couldn't do this without you. This is a conversation. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Jen Moonen.
And I am Maddie K. Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.
Welcome to Bits of Time, where we ask you the simple question, is this video game worth your time? And we're two brothers having a conversation about a game and why we loved it.
Or a difficult discussion about why I didn't or we didn't beat a game. So I hope you join us.
Because it gets pretty wacky sometimes with the questions we ask each other, and maybe a little heated every once in a while too. If you plan on sticking around, you'll be getting 2 episodes each month, the first and third Wednesday.
We also have a brand new debate-focused series, so if you want to be a part of it, join us.
Yeah, join us. Or, reach out, get in contact with us, and maybe you could be on the show with us and debating all kinds of things, granular or not. We'll see you then.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.